Hang on a minute.
Over there. Good morning. Some say they have destroyed the decor and decency of the House of Commons. Some say they're a hysterical, screaming rat pack of sleazebags. Certainly they've provided some life to the House of Commons, and they have made the lives of Wilson, Mulroney to some extent, and Crosby an absolute misery. The Liberal Caucus is in town today, headed by that man who supports Robinson's actions defying the law, John Turner. But in the studio this morning, I've got 2/3 of the Rat Pack and one spare caucus chairman. And first of all, let's have a look at the performance in the House of Commons. Let's see Crosby going after Copp.
Mr. Speaker, the short answer is just quieten down, baby. In other words, cop out.
I am in receipt of a notice of privilege from the Honourable Member for Hamilton East.
Mr. Speaker, earlier in the House today, I was told by the Minister of Justice to quiet down, baby. Subsequent to that, the self-same minister referred to myself and some of my colleagues as titmice. And I would like to inform the House, Mr. Speaker, I would like to inform the House and those Conservatives who find this very humorous that I am a member of Parliament, 32 years old, elected to represent the people of my area, and I resent the comments of the minister who is responsible for the equality of women in this country. I resent his remarks in the House talking about quiet down, baby. I'm not his baby, and I'm nobody's baby, and I'd like him to withdraw those remarks.
And Sheila Copps is in the studio this morning. We'll see if she can match her advance billing. Now I want to give you an example of the performance in the House of number 2 member of the Rodent Brigade, which is John Crosby's phrase in this clip.
We have been waiting with trepidation all week the charge of the Rodent Brigade.
Will the report indicate precisely why the RCMP waited 30 days before they charged Premier Hatfield, or will the report be nothing but a fraud, a sham, and a deceit?
Also in the studio this morning we have Doug Frith, whom I believe once was a cabinet minister in the short-lived Turner government. He's the chairman of the caucus. But we'll start off with the Rat Pack's top performer, equal billing with the Nunziata, Sheila Copps, after the break. That's good. Are you comfortable like that? Sure. Here are a couple of rookie MPs who've caused more trouble in the House of Commons than the whole of the NDP opposition this year. Sheila Copps, Hamilton East, I think it is. How old are you, Sheila?
32 and pushing 33.
When will you be 33?
Next week.
Next week. Why are you so nice and smiling? I thought you'd come in here a hatchet-faced broad, ready to slay the country.
Well, Jack, having seen you from coast to coast, I was dying to meet you. That's why I'm
I withdraw the remark broad at once. It slipped out of my...
Narrow.
Narrow. Now, here is John Nunziata. Your constituency is somewhere in the east. Where is it?
York Southwest and in Toronto.
All right, now tell me what you really think of Mulroney and Crosby, Sheila Copps.
Well, I think Crosby's got a little more bluster and blarney. I think he keeps us on our toes to a certain extent. Mulroney, I don't trust the man. I don't think he's a man of his word, and I think he doesn't know what he's doing with the country.
What was the phrase in French you used which Michael Wilson took offense to?
I think I called him a liar in French.
Menteur.
C'est ça.
Were you forced to withdraw that?
No, I was not forced to withdraw because it was never brought to the attention of the Speaker. In fact, Mr. Wilson called me baby and told me to take the story outside, but he didn't raise it with the Speaker, and so I didn't withdraw.
What started the caper with Crosby? Did he not like you from the moment you went into the house?
Well, the Crosby caper began that particular day when he was under attack from certain members of our caucus regarding family contracts, and he really went...
What do you mean? You're being terribly modest. Regarding family contracts. Now, you wouldn't say that in the House of Commons, would you?
Well, if you want to hear it like it is in the
Right.
House, the man was giving jobs to his sons. We knew that Wilson was giving jobs to his brother-in-law, sisters. It was a family affair, and so we were attacking him, and he came out and called Bob Kaplan a slime and lower than the lowest. And as he was screaming and yelling, I leaned over and I said, "Is there a doctor in the house?" And he just went completely bonkers. He started yelling and throwing up his hands and pointing his fingers, and he just lost control.
Was that when he called you a titmouse?
That's right, and he also told me to settle down, baby.
And you strongly resent that chauvinistic approach?
Well, I confronted him outside the house, and I said I was elected to serve, and I'm not your baby. And he backed down.
Did you give him one of your fancy awards? Patronage of the Week awards?
I think he got a PAW award at some point. The first winner was Joe Clark, followed by Michael Wilson.
What did Joe Clark win it for?
He won it for contracts that were given to his sister-in-law and brother-in-law with respect to legal contracts.
Now, what's your contribution been, other than shouting fraud, sham, and deceit on various occasions?
Just a humble liberal backbencher doing my job the best way I know how, Jack.
Well, treat me like you treat the Speaker of the House of Commons.
With respect.
Do you always do that?
Well, the Speaker, I've had difficulties with him in the past, and I've stood up to him, and he apologized on one occasion for taking a cheap shot, and but I think we now recognize our respective roles and we respect one another.
Has the Rat Pack gone silent today?
Well, the Rat Pack was a creation of the media. We played along with it. It was a fun thing, but it's a thing of the past. The issues were there several months ago, a year ago, and we've gone on to different things now. I personally am quite busy with several pieces of legislation in the justice area that I'm responsible for.
Now, I hate to differ with a fellow rodent, but the Rat Pack is not dead. We've just spread our net.
You just killed the Rat Pack.
We've just spread our net. We've involved our leader. We've involved other people in the caucus. We are into the second year of a revival of the Liberal Party, and I think the first year allowed us to get over that bridge. But believe me, you ain't seen nothing yet.
Jack, you'd be a great Rat Packer.
No, I would not. I'm a man of dignity and decorum.
That's not...
But let me give you a test.
Sure.
You're the Justice Critic, are you?
Solicitor General Critic.
Well,
Associate Justice Critic.
So, good
Close.
enough. Do you know what your Mr. Turner said in the House of Commons last week about our problems on Lyell Island?
I recall what he had to say, yes.
Do you support his support of Sven Robinson, the NDPer, who counsels defiance of the laws of the land on the Indian cause?
Well, there comes a time when civil disobedience is necessary.
Do you
Jack.
think civil disobedience is necessary on Lyell Island now?
Well, the Indians seem to have a case. I have concerns, of course, about the rule of law and respect for the rule of law. They appear to be causing some mischief there, but I think...
I don't care what your attitude is, as long as I can get it from you as clearly as when you're asking questions in the House of Commons. Do you support defiance of the injunctions in the cause of the Indians on Lyell Island?
I don't believe there is an injunction now.
There is an
I believe
injunction.
they're seeking an injunction.
They have an injunction. They're seeking civil and criminal contempt proceedings now, probably in the courts on Monday. I'm sorry I have to tell you what's going on in this province.
Well,
but
that's
you know,
one of the reasons that you're lucky to have John Turner there, because John Turner was the person who raised the issue in the forum of the House of Commons last spring. He raised it last summer. And while certainly civil disobedience is not the route that we choose to pursue in Parliament, you need strong voices. Where are the BC members of the Conservative Party? We've never heard from them. We haven't heard from them over the last 6 months.
ask me the question again. Where are the BC members?
That's right.
All your members were thrown out because of the appalling performance of the Liberals in the West Coast for the past 20-odd years.
Okay, so you've got Conservatives in there now, but who's speaking for the people of British Columbia?
Pat
They've left
Carney.
that job to the opposition.
Carney, a magnificent member of the cabinet about whom you have no complaints.
She said that Canadians were not going to pay more than Americans for the price of natural gas, and we're doing that right now. The selling price of natural gas in the Northern Californian area is cheaper than it is in Canada, so she's broken her promise on that issue.
All right, now let's get back to the Hatfield affair. You've dropped that. That is the Hatfield affair. All that's buried, dead and done, and you're all good friends now.
No, not
is
at
that
all.
correct?
Not at all. Mr. McKay was demoted for displaying abysmal poor judgment in that case. It was wrong for him to meet with Premier Hatfield. We all know he met with him because Hatfield was a conservative and a friend, and we doubt very much whether he would have afforded the same privilege to Joe Blow from Kokomo or Jack Webster from BC.
Mm-hmm. What do you think of Suzanne Blake-Grenier and her expense accounts and trips to Europe?
I think she's out of control. I think that not only is she out of control, what is particularly despicable, I might say, when you heard the comments of Eric Nielsen, who said that we went after her on the basis of racism and sexism. He was echoing statements made by the Prime Minister in the French media. Now, the Prime Minister didn't have the guts to say it in the English media, but he told the French media that we were going after Blake-Grenier because it was a kind of a racist, anti-French thing to do. And it's that type of double standard, double speak that the Prime Minister has been dropping across the country that will, in the final analysis, be his Achilles heel.
Rate his performance in the House of Commons as a man with a massive majority. Rate it. Tell me what you really think of him.
Jack, if you saw him last week, there was a look of panic on his face that you only see from a wounded animal who's running out of a forest with all guns blazing behind him. He doesn't have an answer. He doesn't have an agenda. His handlers have told him to keep his mouth shut, and I think over the next 6 months you're going to see a man falling apart at the seams.
Mm-hmm. More with Nunziata and Copps after the break. Sheila Copps, John Nunziata, 2/3 of the Rat Pack. I don't know where the other third is this morning. Where is Boudria?
He was in Cologne on an agricultural mission. He's joining us tonight for dinner.
Actually, this is half the Rat Pack. Brian Tobin is also
Oh, yeah, I'd
a
forgotten
member of the
him.
pack.
We have Francophone members too, charter members. Jean-Claude Malépart. Do you know Jean-Claude?
No, I don't know Jean-Claude.
He's been fighting for seniors, and you might see his large frame on television from time to time.
What important part does Mila Mulroney play in the Tory, image? And what do you think of Mila Mulroney? I've got your other quotes here.
Okay. I think that Mila Mulroney, and the part that they excised from Chatelaine was when I said that I felt that as a wife she had been very supportive to her husband, and for that she deserves a lot of kudos. I think she's been very supportive to him in his private and his public life, and any spouse would want that. On the other hand, I feel that as a woman who's about Mila's age and who's been involved in politics in a different way, I would have preferred if she had kind of gone in and got her own identity. People used to go after Maureen McTeer because she kept her own name, but in a sense, Maureen was probably more representative of the new woman in Canada than...
And how is it you describe Mila?
I think I called her a political ornament who derived her identity from her husband's career. Mm-hmm. Something along those lines.
Well, let's not forget that she asked the RCMP to salute her. And she also has a suite of offices in the PMO first time, and she seems to be building a bureaucracy around herself.
Why would it not be proper for the RCMP to salute the Prime Minister's wife?
Not at all, not at all. We don't have a presidential system here. The RCMP have never saluted the spouse of a prime minister. She requested it. I think that she thinks that being the wife of a prime minister is her ticket to royalty.
But it also ties in with sort of the Mulroney presidential style of government, because you remember when President Reagan came for the Shamrock Summit last...
The Sham.
That's right, the Sham Summit.
The Sham Summit.
They forgot to invite Jeanne Sauvé. She just happens to be the Governor General, and she really got back to him at the press gallery dinner. She stood up and in front of everybody she said, "Mr. President." The place was just in stitches. I mean, she leveled him with 2 words.
Oh, okay, it's good. You've broken the confidentiality now of the press gallery dinner,
that
which
was
is off the
reported,
record.
widely reported at the time.
Widely reported. It was a good crack, nevertheless.
Oh, it was a great
not?
crack, that's right.
Now, let's go down some of the scandals, seeing you in such a modest mood this morning. Mr. Mulroney, of course, handled the Tunagate scandal expertly, did he not?
Not at all. Not at all. He certainly bungled it. There were a lot of well-known Tories that had to retract, and their credibility was put on the line. I question the Prime Minister's credibility throughout that particular issue. There were far too many others that have had different versions of what actually occurred.
By credibility, you mean it's doubtful whether or not you can believe the words he says.
Well,
is that right?
Well, I'm not the only one. There are a lot of Canadians that distrust the man. They question his credibility, his integrity. He says one thing and does another. He promised that he wouldn't touch senior citizen pensions, and then he tried to de-index the pensions. He said that universality was a sacred trust, and then he tried to attack universality. You just can't trust what the man says. And that's not what Canadians want. They expect some integrity and honesty out of their politicians.
Did we get that from the Liberals? Did you not have a record of patronage and jobs for the boys,
Yeah, but
unexcelled even by the Tories?
Jack, we didn't promise to change things. The Tories made it an issue in that election campaign. Prime Minister Mulroney said that he would reform that instrument of national life. He said that people would no longer be appointed based on family connections or political affiliation. The moment he came to office, he started appointing his flacks, hacks, and Tory bagmen to positions. So it was his party and him personally that made it an issue, and then he backtracked on that promise as well.
But you will concede, of course, that your government too also appointed their hacks, flacks, and Liberal bagmen.
But we were.
It wasn't a family affair. It wasn't a family affair. I dare say that...
oh, given a little time, I'm sure I could come up with family connections and Liberal patronage.
But the other thing, Jack, that I think you will have to agree with in terms of the Liberal government, people knew where Pierre Trudeau stood.
Right.
People knew where John Turner stood in the last election. And Brian Mulroney ran across the country dropping promises upon the people of Kelowna, the people of Baie-Comeau,
and
the
you've
people
forgotten
of
Salmon
Moncton.
Arm, the famous finger promise.
Penticton,
oh no,
where
that
I
was
just came from.
that was Trudeau who did the Salmon Arm finger promise, wasn't it?
Well, you knew
That
where
was
Trudeau
appalling.
stood. Whether you agreed or disagreed, you knew where the man stood, and you knew what he wanted, and you knew the kind of vision that he had for the country. Where does Mulroney stand? After over a year in office, nobody knows. And believe me, even his own pollsters haven't been able to.
I notice you're now an instant expert on BC housing. What was it you said yesterday?
Well, I have been actually in extremely close touch over the last year with Art Lee and the Liberal Party of British Columbia. The
What's
next
his name?
Premier of British Columbia, Art Lee.
Is he in
former
social
member of
credit?
Parliament. The social credit, you mean the Conservatives? No, they're in cahoots together. He's
You've been
the
in
Liberal
close touch
candidate.
with Art Lee, the Liberal leader.
And we've actually been also in pretty close touch with some of the cooperative people here in Vancouver and in British Columbia. When you see that the BC government spends the least of any government in Canada, the least amount of money of any government in Canada, it's an absolutely appalling record. And the federal government now wants to give BC the right to look after all the housing programs. It would be a disaster.
They'd divert the money, wouldn't they?
They certainly wouldn't spend it on social housing. And
like they do with the other grants, which obviously sometimes go to general revenue instead of education.
Absolutely.
That was your government's fault for not tying down these grants specifically.
Well, the conditional grants were in fact instituted at the insistence of the provinces. When BC said, when they renegotiated the agreement, they wanted to do whatever they wanted with the money, and the Liberals in Ottawa, trying to be cooperative, as is our nature,
as is your nature.
tried to accommodate them.
When Mulroney told me he was going to set up patronage reviews and would remove any ones which had been given because of nepotism, he added an implied nuance that he would only have his patronage reviews if you and the Rat Pack shut up. Have there been any patronage reviews?
He tabled a document with a big blue ribbon just a couple of months ago, and in fact the whole thing has been a big sham. It talks about a code of ethics for members of parliament. It's not the members of parliament who need a code of ethics. You saw last week Stuart McGuinness from Nova Scotia picked up another $3 million plus plum in a contract that was awarded to his department for shares in a company which he holds. And the Deputy Prime Minister stood in the House and defended him and said, well, he's got 120 days to sell his shares, and he hasn't done so yet.
Yeah, but we don't believe that if you were in office tomorrow, you'd be any better.
Well, I think the first thing that has to be done is to follow the lead of David Peterson, the Liberal leader, and the new Premier of Ontario, who's instituted guidelines on advertising contracts.
But it's quite understandable, is it not, that Broadbent is the most popular political leader in the country when you look at the performances and/or Mulroney or Turner, isn't it?
There's no question that Mr. Broadbent is a competent individual. There's also no question that people will not support him or his party. to lead this country. Their views are too far out. They lack in credibility with their economic policies and other policies, and they are destined to remain the third party forever and a day.
Did you vote against C-49 on the toughening up the prostitution laws in BC?
Yes, yes.
You did you?
Yes.
Nice to know. Did you vote against it?
I was absent, but if I had been there, I would have voted against it, because even the Canadian Bar Association, even the Canadian Federation of Municipalities, who are not exactly the most liberal-minded thinkers, were against the bill because they felt it was far too wide-ranging and it didn't deal with the issue of pimps. It strikes out at the prostitution.
The criminal code deals with the
pimps.
issue. The criminal code deals with the issue of
It doesn't
pimps.
touch the pimps, and it also does not touch the issue of the users, and it takes two to tango.
It's a horrible piece of legislation.
It may well be a horrible piece of legislation, but something had to be done, and it was you liberals again who sat on it for years and years.
Jack, from a civil libertarian point of view, it's cause for concern for every Canadian. It gives the police far too much discretion. It makes it a criminal offense to communicate or to attempt to communicate for the purposes of prostitution.
Well, that depends, of course, on how it's interpreted in the courts, because obviously a wink and a nudge is not sufficient for prosecution.
Jack, what it does is it gives police the discretion. If you've got a cop that doesn't like you, Jack, doesn't like you because of your show and decides that he wants to get to you, he would have reasonable and probable grounds if you in any way attempt to communicate with someone unbeknownst to yourself who is a prostitute.
With
Jack,
all due respect.
I was at a meeting in Yellowknife, and I'm happy to say it here in Vancouver because I challenged Michael Harcourt to come out on it. When Michael Harcourt was a member of a subcommittee of the Canadian Federation of Municipalities that unanimously opposed that bill for the very reasons that John is citing, and because they felt that it didn't deal with the overall issue of prostitution. It is a band-aid to deal with street solicitation.
It's a knee-jerk political piece of legislation.
But all you had to do, if you'd been paying attention, was to make it quite clear that soliciting only had to be simple and not pressing and persistent to cause an offense. That was all you needed.
That would have been a far more acceptable approach than the present piece of legislation.
It's amazing how
which
so
was
many
drafted
members
by
of the
amateurs.
House of Commons can become so confused over a crucial issue in the city of Vancouver.
Well, we did certainly propose some amendments, and those amendments were not accepted by the government.
Fair
the bill
enough.
is through now.
They're modest and quiet this morning, and everybody in the country loves these two members of the rodent, two persons who are members of the rodent brigade. Your calls after the break. Yeah, I'm sorry to take my sensationalist, provocative approach to you two modest members of the Liberal Party, you know, because normally we don't bother to interview riding MPs from the East. You can understand why, can't you?
Well, as long as we're not from Toronto.
Yeah, that's...
Pardon? lunch bucket Sheila.
Oh, she goes home every night?
To Hamilton. Could you imagine? Would you want to go home to Hamilton every night?
Do you commute every day?
No, Hamilton is a little far, but I tease him because the way you feel about the East, we feel about Toronto. And I must tell you that we're going to blast you away in the football game on Monday.
I'm rooting for the Lions. As a native British Columbian, I'm rooting for the Lions.
When did you get this honorary citizenship?
I was born in Revelstoke, BC, many, many years ago.
So you knew he had something good going for him.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, good morning.
Morning.
I listened to your guest, Jack. I watched him on television on the parliamentary proceedings. And, you know, to listen to them talk with these halos around their head, they destroyed the country, they got us to this horrendous debt, and now they're talking about quick fix projects. You know, they should go back home and just stay there.
Oh, your friend Brian isn't doing much better.
Not my friend either. He's not much better. But you guys make me sick.
Well, gee, nice of you to call. I mean, if you were in the House of Commons, I would say, look, when I was elected on the 4th of September last, the people of Hamilton sent me to Ottawa knowing I'd be in opposition. They wanted to get rid of the Liberals. They did, quite clearly, but they elected a few of us across the country to, in some way, try and balance that tremendous majority of Tories. If you stood in the House of Commons, as I do, with 211 voices trying to shout you down, then you have to stand up. And if you don't, you're going to be lost in the shuffle, and the party will be too.
Go ahead, please.
Hello, yeah, I'm calling on the same lines as the last caller. I can't believe listening to you, the garbage you're expelling is sickening, and I just like to tell you, I don't know anybody who'd believe anything you say, and I hope you have a lovely day.
Thank you very much. It's very kind of you.
That sounds a little bit like a letter I got a few weeks ago from some Tory who was very upset over the fact that I had exposed a minister who didn't show up at a meeting with workers whose shoe factory was being closed down and was spied at the baseball game. I got a very nasty letter, incredibly nasty letter from this man who said, your father was really nice, but you are the lowest of the lows, the rottenest person on earth. And so I had crafted a reply, and I was kind of passing it around to my colleagues for advice. And I got a beautiful response from George Baker, a one-liner which said, thank you very much for your wonderful comments about my father. I really appreciate it. Sincerely.
Have I taken this one? Go ahead, please.
Yes, concerning the prostitution issue, we discussed this in our class, and most of our class more or less came to the same conclusion, is that, I mean, it goes on anyways, right? And obviously there's enough demand for it that people are doing it. And the law pretty well puts all the prostitutes aside and snuffs it out more or less. We came to the conclusion, like, I mean, why doesn't the government just try to take action to protect them, you know? Instead of, like, you know, trying to say it doesn't really happen, because it does happen, you know?
Okay, thank you.
Well, the position we took was that a comprehensive piece of legislation was necessary and that Bill C-49 was not the answer. We had to deal with the whole problem of prostitution,
I don't want to get diverted,
including the social aspect of it.
First of all, there was a Liberal Royal Commission which was a waste of time and money, the Fraser Commission. In the city of Vancouver, in the West End, the situation was so appallingly, horrendously, disgusting, venal, and criminal that the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of British Columbia did a most unusual thing. He imposed an injunction on the whole of the West End. He had to go to common law to try and protect the decent citizens of the West End. Yeah. And here are you, when we tried to make an attempt, trying to stall the thing.
No, Jack, with the greatest of respect, don't misrepresent this situation. We didn't stall the thing. We didn't delay it. We voted against the bill because of very serious concerns we had about the legislation. We recognized the problem, and we wanted to address the problem in a fair and reasonable way that would protect the rights of innocent people in Canada.
In fact, we agreed that we would not stall it because we recognized there are some very serious problems, and we just felt this was not the solution.
The Liberal government's previous fault. Well, go ahead, please.
Good morning.
Morning.
You know, I cannot believe the audacity of you people. You know, you guys go from
You've got a lot of
extreme to
Tories
the other.
calling in.
The Liberals step out here after 20 years of isolation, tell us that BC is spending the most money, I mean the least money, and the previous Liberal government racked up a debt of $180 billion. You know, I don't believe it. And, you know, how do you expect us to believe you guys?
Well, the figures on housing are there. BC has the worst record in Canada.
Sure it does, but you guys ran the country for 20 years.
This is the provincial government spending on social housing. It's the spending that it goes out to families of mother-led families, single parents who can't afford the kinds of costs of apartments in the city of Vancouver.
How do you account for the $180 billion debt you racked up? You put the onus on the children of tomorrow.
The largest per capita debt was actually, on a per capita basis, was post-war.
Do you agree with the $180 billion debt?
I don't think you reduce deficits by paying through the noses for poor people. I don't think you reduce...
No, enough of this for the moment.
$1 billion...
How do you justify an $180 billion debt?
I'm interested in getting social housing for poor people in this country.
Sitting back there in Ottawa.
Just a minute, hold on.
I don't live in Ottawa, by the way.
Hold on, please. I must get a report from Lyell Island this morning to keep us up to date. Are you there, Mark?
I'm here. Go ahead.
No, you go ahead to me. Has anything happened? Were the Indians there this morning? Did the Mounties move them away? Is logging continuing? Just give me a brief report.
Logging has not yet started at about, right at first light. The first of the loggers came up and one young Haida fellow was lying in the road. But at that point, Inspector Ron Evans, the officer in charge here, came down to the Haida camp with the news that new federal initiatives may forestall some of the problems here. After a brief consultation, the Haida people here called the Minister of Indian Affairs, and the Minister of Indian Affairs appears to have accepted an invitation to come here and perhaps mediate this dispute.
Okay, thank you very much, Mark. We'll hear from you later. Much obliged. Over and out. And I'll take a break and come back to the Rat Pack. The delightful Sheila Copps and the balding but still handsome John Nunziata. Two Liberal ratfinks, not ratfinks, Rat Pack members. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, getting back to this
No,
debt.
no, you're the housing one. I'm not taking you again. Away with you. Cheeky man. Go ahead, please.
Is that me?
That's you.
Yes, Jack. I just phoned in to think that I don't know your two guest names there, but I find them a breath of fresh air, and I have one question for them. I was wondering if maybe in the next provincial election they would be into participating in BC so that.
That's a very good question indeed.
I was there to help Artley in the by-election, and I will be back in the provincial election, and I know that John and I have both been very active in provincial and even municipal.
You want to split the vote and let the socialists in, is that correct?
Absolutely not. There's no split vote. A Liberal is a Liberal. I mean, I just came from Penticton last night, and I couldn't believe that some people parade as so-creds when the color is right, and then they get Liberal memberships. We want true Liberals.
All free enterprises here vote so-cred in elections. See, to keep out the socialist hordes. The Tories especially, the Liberals, some of the nicer Liberals go and vote for the NDP.
Well,
Jack, we're poised to make a breakthrough in this province.
Did you know that Ian Waddell used to write speeches for Robert Nixon in Ontario? I mean, there are a lot of good people out here who
Ian used to
unfortunately
write
aired.
speeches.
That's right.
So
That's
we
right.
Ian Waddell.
That's right.
Oh, that's a case for capital punishment. Go ahead, please.
Mr. Webster.
Yes, sir.
I'm calling as a true conservative, not a progressive conservative, and I would like to say that I find myself in an unusual position to congratulate the so-called Rat Pack. I think they've been doing an excellent job, and it's too bad that during the 16 years of Liberal misrule under King Rat, that the opposition haven't had some ferrets to seek out the real rats that had devoured Western Canada and have done so much to destroy this country.
Well said, sir. Matter of fact, I like them too, but just because not because they're accused of being sleazebags, but because they're perceptive troublemakers. Go ahead from Nelson.
Hello.
Hello.
I am also phoning to say I watch the news every single night, and I am so grateful for the efforts of Ms. Copps, and is it Mr.
Nunziata.
Pardon me?
Nunziata.
It's a good Irish name.
Nunziata. And I also, Mr. Nunziata, lived in Revelstoke for 14 years, and certainly didn't know that you were born there. And I
sure
hope
was.
that
Go on.
more efforts can be made to boost up the Liberal Party in British Columbia. I have no party affiliation. Think that possibly I'm stronger to the Liberals.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. She'll go on forever. You know how these women talk on and on endlessly. Go ahead, please.
Morning, Jack.
Morning.
Yes, I just want to make a statement here that I think that these people and probably their adversaries are making a sort of a mockery of the parliamentary system. And I don't know whether they watch the television afterwards and see themselves up there speaking, but it just makes a joke of everything, and I think it's broadcast throughout the world that the parliamentary system in Canada is just a shambles.
Do you respect Winston Churchill?
I respected him, yes.
He said that the job of the loyal opposition is to oppose. And that's what we're there to do in the House, and we do it constructively in committees. But believe me, if we didn't have the few voices that we have in opposition, you would have a government that would be running roughshod over the rights of the Canadian people.
Well, I believe in opposition, but I believe that the people that we elect to the Parliament in Canada should get on with the job at hand. The job that is most obvious in Canada today, and not the jobs that are, or the mistakes that have been done in the past.
Thank you, sir. Go ahead, please.
Yes, I'd like to express my appreciation for the work they're doing. I watch the show on Parliament all the time, and I saw when John Crosbie called her babe and all that stuff, and I also appreciate the way they handle the old age pensions.
Good. What was it he called you?
Titmouse.
Pipe down, babe.
Quieting down, babe.
Quieting down, babe, and titmouse.
And then he said she was coughing out.
Is he on the verge of blowing his gasket all the time?
Well, I'm not sure how much of it is real and how much of it is blarney. I think that day it was real. There are days when it seems to be a bit of a that Irish Blarney.
He's somewhat of a buffoon. He's not comfortable with what he's doing. He's bored with the justice portfolio. He wants to be prime minister. He wants to be finance minister. He's never going to get...
How can they say they support women and then make comments like that?
And he's the minister who's responsible for equality for women.
Yeah, you pointed
really
that
incredible.
out. Except Jeffrey Stevens in the Globe and Mail today says that he is quietly doing a very effective job with his legislation in the justice portfolio.
He's implementing the liberal agenda. The divorce bill was our bill. The drunk driving bill was our bill. Most of the legislation that he's brought forward was legislation that was introduced by the previous liberal administration but died because of the election being called.
The other thing, Jack, is that in comparison with some of the other ministers, he's at least bringing forward legislation. You know, in the area of housing and labor, there has not been a single bill introduced since this Parliament began. Last week we were scraping the bottom of the barrel looking for some kind of a mini tariff bill to debate because the Conservatives had nothing on the agenda. When Brian Mulroney said he wanted to take a couple months off to rebuild and reshape, it was because he had nothing planned for the legislative agenda.
More with Kopp and Nunziata after the break. What was it your mother said about you, Sheila Copps?
I think she said she said, I was a very tough mother. If she didn't have a mother like me, she'd have become a juvenile delinquent. In black print. Can you imagine my mother? I was so insulted.
Yeah, Crosby thinks you're a juvenile delinquent anyway, and you run around in your motorbike. Do you really run around on a motorbike?
No, I don't. It was a come on by a photographer who said, Sheila, will you get on a Harley Davidson? I said, sure, I'll do anything once, almost.
Yeah, for publicity. And
for fun. We were right behind the slag heaps at one of the steel mills in Hamilton. It was the first time I had a chance to see it up so close.
And you're not a loudmouth punk, are you? Deny it.
I'm absolutely not a punk.
Okay, let's talk about your loudmouth. Let's talk about a couple of issues. As two members from the prosperous Ontario, where there is very little unemployment, 8%.
We have our share, Jack.
8%. Are you committed to free trade all the way?
No.
No.
Are you against free trade all the way? How much unemployment would free trade cause in Ontario on an overnight switch?
Well, David Peterson has suggested it would eliminate about 700,000 jobs.
700,000? We like it for the lumber, of course.
Well, I think, you're in the same situation peculiarly as we are in Hamilton, in that we've had the steel industry. It has been free trade, and yet they've been bringing in protectionism. I don't know whether we should bow to the kind of reverse blackmail by saying, let's have free trade so we don't have protectionism, which they're bringing in to prevent the kind of free trade that we already have.
Go ahead, please.
Morning, Jack.
Morning.
I'd like to make 2 points with Sheila and John. First of all, over the patronage and the credibility of Brian Mulroney. First thing is that Canadian people forget that it was Brian Mulroney who nailed John Turner over the patronage, and once he came in, he started appointing all of these Tory hacks. And I happen to be a conservative, but I think his credibility really went down the line with that, and I want to congratulate them on that. Secondly, with the cost-sharing programs, I think the Canadian people should be aware of this VNA Act and the Canada Act, which divides the powers. And I have a question to them. Is there any way possible that we can tighten up the rules and regulations as far as cost-sharing programs with British Columbia?
It is possible. They're in the process of negotiating new formulas at the moment. The cost-sharing unconditional transfer of payments from the federal government has only been a creation of the last 5 years, and they are in the process of renegotiating that at the moment. But I think the answer to that is also whether the Prime Minister has the guts to stand up to the Premier of the province of British Columbia, and frankly, I doubt it.
Go ahead, please.
I'd like to compliment Sheila Copps on her outspokenness in the House. I would also like both the members to ask John Turner if he would like to apologize to the women of Canada and BC, who, when they went to Ottawa in 1970, he went and played tennis and refused to meet with them.
1970, ma'am, is dragging it back quite a little bit.
Now, I think that they should, people should not use the women's movement to get votes unless they really mean it. And the other thing I would
Let's ask Sheila now, how does he stand now on women's issues? Is he properly in line?
John Turner is a man of of his own mind. I don't think anybody's going to be in line with everything that everybody proposes. I can say as a person who works with him on a daily basis, he has been absolutely and totally supportive of the initiatives that we've raised in the House. He has been totally on side with the quality report, which has just recently been issued, and in fact, in contrast to the government, he's taken some very strong and courageous positions.
I'd also like to ask the official critic of the Solicitor General's Department how many solitary confinement units he has visited in Canada, how many other members of his party have actually visited solitary confinement units, and for that matter, how many members of Parliament have ever visited solitary confinement units.
Well, I can only speak for myself. I know that other members of my caucus, including Sheila Copps, have visited federal institutions. I have visited several institutions over the last year, and I'm somewhat concerned about some of the things I saw in those institutions. I spoke to inmates, I spoke to wardens, I spoke to guards, and as I say, there's room for improvement.
Go ahead, please. Where are you?
Hello?
That's you, ma'am.
Oh, yes. I just want to welcome Mrs. Anderton from Western Ontario. And I want to welcome John Nunziata to BC and invite him to come and live here because we need people like him here. I am now a resident of BC, and I feel that Ontario has a lot more to offer their senior citizens than BC has here. So I'd really like him to come out here.
I'd love to. If you can find me a riding, I'll come.
Find you a riding, but we can't find you a job due to the policies of the Liberals and later the Conservative government.
I can always take over your job, Jack.
You couldn't do it.
I can be just as obnoxious
How could
as
a man as balding and old as you take over a young man's job like this? You might be able to do it, but you would alienate too many people with your abrasiveness.
I've seen John being a lot more obnoxious than I am ever.
I beg your pardon.
Give me an example. Go ahead, please.
Jack.
Yep.
I'd just like to tell your guests that there are a lot of people in British Columbia that support them, being that a few people progressed beyond the last ice age in this province, and for them to keep up the good work. I'd like to ask them, however, when the next leadership convention is going to be, and what their positions are on Jean Chrétien's chances for taking over the Liberal Party.
We have a leader. We have the greatest leader in the country. We have the guy who's going to be the next Prime Minister.
Absolutely.
There is no leadership.
No question. There'll be a leadership review in a year's time. I'm confident that once again the Liberals will reconfirm John Turner as the leader and the next Prime Minister of Canada.
Go ahead, please.
Hello, Jack.
Yep.
First of all, I usually watch the House of Commons channel at this time. But this morning, I had to come on here to compliment Sheila and John on their performance in the House.
Thank you.
And I really enjoy it when the two of you are on there. Now, I get the impression that some of the other members would be stuck for an answer if you said hello to them. But I really enjoy you two people. And Jack, you got a bit of a compliment, too. You've got a good program.
I've always known that, you fool.
And the other thing is, I'm a little bit fed up. Like when the Liberals are in power, they blame everything on the Conservatives who were in power, and now, of course, the Conservatives are blaming everything that happened on the Liberals who were in power. Why didn't somebody stand up and say, hey, okay, I'm taking responsibility for that. I'm not blaming it on somebody else.
They've got no guts.
That's right.
Surely all Mulroney had to do during the Tunagate and all these other things was to accept the fact that the mistakes had been made.
That's right. Why don't they do that? That's why we're putting these people in Ottawa.
Okay, bye. Go ahead. Oh, no, just a minute. Took the wrong one. Cranbrook, you say. Go ahead from Cranbrook.
Yes, Jack, I was just...
Carry on.
Yes, Jack, I was just calling in to thank Sheila and John for standing up for us in Parliament, and that's just the kind of people we need.
Okay, we'll continue with the Sheila John love-in and bring in Doug Frith, who's the Caucus chairman, you know, just because he's here, after the break. I'll tell you
I've been
what.
up since 5:30 this morning.
Did you know we were picking you up in the helicopter?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, more. There are more Liberals here than voted for the party in the last provincial election. 3 Liberals. John Nunziata, Sheila Copps, and Doug, is it Frith or Frith?
Frith.
Are you related to Royce Frith?
No, I'm not.
He's the Liberal that got the Senate appointment, isn't he?
That's correct.
And what are you, sir?
I'm a member of Parliament for Sudbury, Northern Ontario, and the Caucus chairman.
And you were a cabinet minister in that terribly short-lived, such a short time that I don't even know what position you held.
That's correct. And fortunately, I'm just bringing it back to my own memory. I had 12 weeks, had two rides with my car and driver, once on the way to the airport after we issued the writ, and once to my last cabinet meeting. But at the time, I was the Minister of Indian Affairs and Northern Development.
And you're entitled to be called the Honourable.
That's correct, for life.
The Honourable.
A life sentence.
That's right. And the Liberals are back in again. And you're eventually defeated, you'll get a Senate seat, and then we'll have Frith in the Senate.
It'll be a family compact.
Now, in the lobby of the House of Commons, do you run into your various bête noirs, and do you have little snappy scenes with, say, Crosby or Wilson in the House of Commons?
They never come around to our side. We just get to see most of what we call the bookends, or the surfers, because they came in with the wave.
I once confronted the Prime Minister in the washroom. And
were you standing side by side?
Side by side. I looked straight ahead, Jack, let me tell you. But after he washed his hands, he went to the paper dispenser, and he didn't know how to operate it. And an aide had to come over to show him to press the button and roll the little thing to get the paper out.
So now he knows, due to you, a rookie MP, he's pretty rookie himself, how to get the paper out of the dispenser in the men's washroom.
That's correct.
Mm-hmm. But Crosby really doesn't like you, especially when you attacked him on his sons.
Well,
he flipped his gasket that day.
Crosby and I actually have our offices side by side, and we had a toe-to-toe very early on, which was never reported in Parliament. I have a very small office, his is very large, and I've got chairs outside my hallway. And Mr. Crosby made a complaint against me to say that I should have those chairs removed because they were unsightly. So I was called by the Sergeant-at-Arms, and I said, well, when you tell the complainant, Mr. Crosby, that he's going to get his Persian rug and his overstuffed leather chairs out of his hallway, I will move my chairs out of my hallway. And I never heard anything more. And that was my first experience with John Crosby.
And he's still got his Persian rug?
He still has his chairs, and I still have mine, right out in the hallway.
And he dropped the battle. That was the first battle you beat.
That's right.
Through the Sergeant-at-Arms. Let's go to the phones. Oh, no, Doug. What are you again? Critic for National Health and Welfare. Deputy Critic for Indian and Northern Development. Chairman of the National Caucus. Are you all here today?
32 of us, members of Parliament and senators, and this is going to culminate, I suppose, this weekend. All of us are going to go to various ridings in British Columbia and just wave the flag.
Well, you must be happy with what the Tories have done about freezing the children's allowances for the 3% level.
The de-indexation. Well, I think that the Tories have flubbed the whole area of social policy since the time that they came in. You know, clearly since last November, they've had one disaster after the other in terms of the social policy of the direction of the country. And I think the most damaging thing to them, besides the family allowance, had to be the de-indexation, the plans to de-index senior citizens. And I still maintain that since the plans, even though they've reversed themselves, the damage has been done and people no longer trust Mulroney or his government.
It was a bold move. Would you have done the same de-indexation?
Never. It's the, this is the problem that we had last summer during the campaign. Turner was out indicating to the country what policies he was hoping to institute, and you had Mulroney running on a set of campaign promises that he never had any intention of keeping. And as a result of that, I think that the people no longer trust the Prime Minister, and he's broken it's a very fragile bond of trust between the people and the Prime Minister, and he's going to, I think, reap exactly what he's sown at the next general election.
You can't beat him next time round. What have you been smoking this morning?
Listen,
Mr. Frith?
There's cash crops in Western.
MPs.
Let me say this, that I'm willing to bet that at the next general election, that the Liberal Party and the Conservative Party are going to be neck and neck, and I go back to 1968 in terms of the memory. Trudeau had 185 seats in 1968 and came within 2 seats of losing that government in 72. So people who say that you cannot kick out a government of 211 members in one term should read their history books.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And Turner tells the truth. That'll be the message.
Turner's credibility is total, you tell me.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Unimpeachable integrity.
You're implying that Mulroney does not.
Absolutely.
That's correct.
Isn't it obvious?
You're the politician. I'm a non-partisan observer in the middle.
Well, he promised to fully index your pension, Jack, and then he backtracked on that promise.
Yeah, he was gutless in that. Quite gutless.
Yeah.
That's why I'm non-partisan, because I say things like that. Go ahead, please.
Hello. Good morning, Jack.
Yes.
Yes, I want to congratulate Sheila and John for their excellent job that they're doing in Parliament. And I'd also like to ask them if in the next election, should the Liberals form the next government, whether or not they're going to keep up this spirit that they have, or if they're just going to sit back and not do anything.
Well, that's probably the most difficult question that anybody has to face. Perrin Beatty said when he took over as Minister of Revenue that it's much easier to govern from the opposition benches, and I think that's true. I do, however, believe that if you're in politics for a reason, if you have a vision for the country or for your own little town or area, that obviously the only way you can achieve that is through government. So obviously both of us, all of us, would want to do it through ministerial responsibility.
You need a different set of skills to survive in opposition than you do to survive in government. And you know, I've been on both sides of that house, and that's the lesson learned.
Yeah, the fact is that once you're in government, you've got to accept the whip and do as the caucus tells you.
Which you do in opposition too, in the sense that there are times when I've supported bills and pieces of legislation that maybe I didn't agree with, but I felt bound by caucus solidarity. We're a team and we have to work as a team.
Go ahead, please.
Hi, I'd like to welcome the guests to BC. I'd like to say that I'm an NDPer, and I'd like to congratulate them on the job they're doing and to keep it up. And I got one question.
Right.
I'd like to know how they can put up with the ministers when they ask them a question, how the ministers evade answering the question.
Well, it's pretty frustrating when we put questions to the ministers and they don't answer. There's nothing we can do. They don't have to answer our questions, but I think Canadians can see through. They watch question period and they realize the questions we're asking and the fact that we're not getting answers.
There's no requirement on any cabinet minister to answer any question or even answer the supplementaries, is there?
Not at all.
Well, lately we'll be happy if we just hear from the Prime Minister because he is being handled. He's being told, sit down and shut up, Brian, because every time you open your mouth, you're creating problems for us.
He's not even there to sit down.
So,
if you take a look at the attendance record of Mulroney in the last 6 weeks, I think there's a clear decision made by his handlers to keep him out of the House of Commons.
Well, it's the same decision made by his party handlers not to let him speak at all in the first election campaign.
But at that point, he was running with a commanding lead, and right now he's not necessarily in that...
Go ahead from Quesnel, please.
Good morning, Mr. Webster.
Morning.
Just a couple of comments, Mr. Webster. Congratulations on your show. I find it probably one of the most heartwarming things happening in this dreadful province we're living in.
That's enough of that. Now get on to them.
Is that your cousin or your nephew?
That's funny.
I would like to congratulate your honourable member for her coolness and calmness in the House of Commons. The flack she's taking, I believe, is unbearable. Unfortunately, she's standing up quite well.
That's our Sheila.
Doesn't bother you one whit, does it? Or does it?
Charlotte Whitten said in order to succeed in this business, you have to be twice as good as any man. But of course, that's not too difficult.
Go ahead,
You
please.
sexist, you.
Go ahead, please.
What about equality?
Good morning, Mr. Webster.
Yeah.
I like a previous couple of other callers, I'm a real conservative, not a corporate welfare progressive conservative. And welcome John and Sheila, and I tell you to go after those bums. They haven't even passed a budget yet. You know, I find it hard to believe there's 211 members there, and not one of them has had the courage of their convictions to walk across the House and sit as an independent or join you. You know, are they also afraid of their place in the party? Take the message back that what we need are jobs, not Brian flying to Brussels to wish us happiness and peace.
Ain't it the truth? What we need are jobs. There's more of a spirit of alienation in this province at the moment than there's ever been in my time in BC, which is nearly 40 years.
Yeah.
Because of jobs. Do you know how many percentage of unemployment here?
15%.
30% in some towns.
I'm surprised, actually, Jack, at the tone of some of the callers. Obviously, there is a very deep alienation here, much more so than in a lot of the other provinces.
No doubt about it. More with Nunziata, Copps, and Frith.
You should get that one with the R's.
After the break. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Jack.
Morning.
When I was hanging on to the line, something amusing occurred to me because one of your guests, I can't see the TV, so I don't know which one, said that at question period, the ministers don't have to answer the question. But earlier in the program, there was a caller asking about the deficit, and Ms. Copps proceeded to answer a question of her own choosing about
No, the person asked
public
me.
housing. So,
No, the gentleman asked me
Robbie
whether I
Burns
was
had a
concerned.
poem about that.
No, the gentleman asked me whether my prime concern was the deficit, and I said no. My prime concern is for public housing and to help those not to fight the deficit on the backs of the poor, which I think is a legitimate point. I don't see the deficit reduction as a cause. I see it as a symptom of an overall economic problem which involves job creation as a priority over deficit reduction.
But if you were in the government, you'd be giving us the usual Michael Wilson prating about attempting to reduce the rate of increase of the deficit, wouldn't you?
But we would not be paranoid about the deficit. It's important to be fiscally responsible. One has to recognize that the deficit is there. It's going to be with us for a long period of time, and we can only hope to manage it, and we can't reduce it on the backs of the disadvantaged in our society.
That's a bit amusing coming from liberals, but in any case, what I really wanted to know about is the prostitution thing. And the bill that's been written was not written by Mr. Crosby. It was written by
his sons that failed law school.
Isn't that so?
Written by officials in the department,
Well,
yes.
Well, if the bill is not satisfactory, if it isn't a good bill, then it's the fault of the bureaucrats. Isn't that?
No, it's not the fault of the bureaucrats.
My main concern is why the cost of the bureaucracy is so high. If the bill is not good, is not acceptable, then it's the fault of the bureaucrats.
No, you have to understand how the parliamentary system operates. Once the government makes a decision in cabinet to go with this bill as an example on C-49 on prostitution, then they put this into writing, but then it goes to committee, and the whole object of the exercise in committee is to improve the bill. And if the government refuses you to put improvements through on it, then the government deserves the flack when the bill comes back to the House that has flaws in it.
I think that bill was subconsciously sabotaged by, instead of going the straight, direct route, they brought in all these weaselly, winker, nudge business, communicate in any form, which gives the opposition who don't know the problem a chance to scream and shout.
Oh, I can assure you, Jack, we know the problem. We heard the residents from Vancouver that came to
You
our
had the
committee.
hookers from Vancouver too, didn't you?
Well, we heard all sides, and we recognize that it is a problem.
Got diverted in
Can
that.
I just say something, because the gentleman's concerned about the deficit. How can he explain...
Concerned about the cost of the bureaucracy.
How can he explain... He raised the issue of the deficit, and I'd like to ask him how he can explain the fact that this government, with Brian Mulroney, and you look at the Teachers Cooperative now, there's a ripple effect through the system. We have $1 billion bank bailout. The Prime Minister says it's a blip on the monetary scene, and then they come to us in Parliament with a bill and they want us to approve a repayment to depositors, anonymous depositors of over $60,000 at the same time as he's telling families they're going to cut back their family allowances.
Yeah, I know, and it's not $1 billion only in the bank. It's $1 billion in the tax rip-off. It's $2 billion in the banks probably. About $3 billion in
And the ripple effect
cash.
through the system, what's happening here in BC with the
Well, Jack, the
Teachers
point is
Cooperative.
that even a year ago, on September the 4th, he was handed a budget deficit of $30 billion. He increased it to 39, and then with some cutting said it was back to 37, and now as a result of all of the decisions made in the last year, this budget's going to be higher than what he had.
What do you think of Barbara McDougall's performance in the banks?
I think that she stood up better than any of the other ministers. I think that Michael Wilson is a disgrace, and that Barbara McDougall was forced because the Prime Minister wouldn't allow her particular position to go forward, that is, let the bank fail in the beginning, that she's had to carry the can for a decision which was really a decision by the Prime Minister.
And she will ultimately be sacrificed after the SD report, SD Commission reports.
Oh, but she's a woman. She has a built-in protection that she not, because she is one of the few women cabinet ministers.
But she's also stood up very well under the pressure, I think, speaking in a non-partisan way. She has done far better in the House and outside than Michael Wilson. Michael Wilson, the finance minister, couldn't answer a question on the issue. His tongue is tied every time he gets up in the House of Commons, and this man is supposed to be running our financial system. He wasn't even at the meeting. No minister, including Barbara McDougall, was at the meeting that decided on the bailout.
If you're looking at it, though, from the standpoint of a minister that answers the question, I mean, Barbara McDougall has stood up in the House of Commons to them, but if you're looking at it from the standpoint of quality of answers, it leaves a lot to be desired.
Oh, absolutely, but she's certainly an improvement over Wilson.
Yeah. Go ahead, please.
Hi. I just got a question for Sheila. Congratulations on your marriage.
Thank you.
And what was that garbage about him couldn't immigrate or stuff like that?
Oh, that was a Tory reaching out into the far recesses of the past, and it was raising private information about Rick's immigration file. He came to Canada in a very normal way, minister's permit, which was issued over 12,000 people, and some Tory thought that they'd like to dig up some sludge.
Hey, how long have you been married?
4 months.
Oh, no family yet?
It's coming, Jack, I hope.
Are you pregnant now?
No, not as far as I know.
That's not what you told me earlier.
Not at the moment.
Not at the moment. You'll give me a call.
Sheila, announce it in BC. Go ahead, announce it in BC. Conceive it in BC.
He's here. He's here.
Well,
now Jack's at a loss for words. I can't believe it.
No, I'm not. I was deciding how to phrase it, and I've changed my mind.
Okay.
Discretion is sometimes the better part of Webster. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Jack.
Morning.
I'd like to, there was a comment made earlier in the program about lack of social housing in British Columbia.
Right.
And I'd like to ask your guests how they can justify the social program when you consider that there are many seniors and people in low income that are living in housing that they have built and created and are struggling to maintain while they're paying taxes to support others to live in social housing that's much superior to what they're living in themselves. And my own feeling is that it's another step down the socialist road to where the government will supply the houses and no one will live in decent housing.
Well, I think that what you're looking at is a change in the taxation system, which maybe Mr. Bennett would consider, which would tie your taxes paid to your income that you receive on a yearly basis, moving away from the fixed approach of a property tax system. There are ways of ensuring that senior citizens, for example, who've already contributed to the economy through their earning years, can have rebates and tax credits on their property taxes. But at the same time, you can't have a government that says we're going to get out of any role for social housing in Canada. When that happens, you're going to see people living in the kind of ghettoized and potentially revolutionizing situations that you've seen in England, in Brixton. You don't want to see that happening.
Go ahead, please.
Morning, Jack.
Morning.
I'd like to ask you guys what to think about members crossing the House. I think they should no longer represent their party and there should be a by-election held.
Nobody in the House of Commons has crossed the floor recently, have they?
Not recently, no.
Although we would probably open up the membership in the Rat Pack to any Tory that wants to cross the floor.
A lot of them are thinking about it, Jack, let me tell you.
That specious garbage. You know that perfectly well. If you're a backbencher in a Liberal government with 211 members, you'd be sitting there nicely doing your duty so that you could get your reward on a commission or a Senate seat in due course.
Not I, Jack.
Maybe I think it's probably fair to say most of them are not considering crossing the floor, but it's also fair to say there are an awful lot of Tory backbenchers who come and talk to us and say, gee, I wish I could switch places with you. They're bored, they're frustrated, they really don't have all that much to do. So the government's creating...
They're not enjoying Parliament.
That's right.
Which is why you have to really reform the system. You have to reform that institution. That's why Jim McGraw's report is so important, because, you know, I've been on both sides. And let me tell you, it's not fun being one of 145 or one of 150 at the back end of the other side. So
more with Frith, Copps and Nunziata from Revelstoke, he said, after the break. I feel vaguely odd now. I've been surrounded by elected Liberals since 9 o'clock this morning, and this is not the usual technique of mine, but these two have made such a noise in the House of Commons, you had to, you know, meet them in some particular detail. Copps and Nunziata. See, Women's Lib, I don't have to call you Mrs. Copps. I can say you or Copps just like I would to another man, right?
That's right, absolutely.
You don't want anybody to open the door for you, do you?
I'll open the door for you, Jack. You're a senior citizen.
Most women slam it in my face. Go ahead, please.
Who are these people kidding? They want to talk about paranoia, spending, and patronage. Have they forgotten about what the Liberal government did in the past to the country? What about Mr. Trudeau's spending? Did he not travel around the country with 3 other people, it seems to me?
Private rail cars.
Imagine that they could even have the nerve to sit there and talk like that.
Well, I want to come back to...
Do you plead guilty to the sins of that dreadful Liberal administration? Do you plead guilty to?
Totally innocent.
You plead guilty to.
I'm pleading the 5th. Oh, it's the wrong country.
Innocent until proven guilty.
Mulroney will make us a 51st state.
Don't hold me responsible for the sins of my fathers.
And mothers.
And Mother, sorry.
Oh, really now? Come on.
No, I
you are
mean-
telling us how responsible you are? You don't want to be held responsible
No,
for what's
I
gone
mean,
on in the past?
seriously,
That's a bit
we
of a
have been
contradiction,
elected.
isn't it?
No, we've been elected last September to be the loyal opposition to the government of Canada. The government of Canada is a conservative government. It's had more than a year to bring forth a conservative agenda. And the issues that we've raised in the House, I mean, Madam,
And
you
you're telling
remember,
us
you
that when you're in
remember.
power, you're going to be different.
I
don't
you-
be, and I
do you
think that
remember
that
the
is
Prime
not,
Minister
because
in
none
his-
of you are ever different. You're all the same. Patronage is part of
In his
politics.
sanctimonious way, the Prime Minister pointed his finger at John Turner and he said, you had an option. And that was imprinted on the minds of the Canadian people, the sign of a man who said that he was going to make things different, and he didn't, and he's got to live to eat his words.
What the woman is afraid of, and what I'm afraid of, is if you people became the government tomorrow, you would do precisely what
Not
you
at
did before, and you'd ladle out the patronage to your ad agencies, your buddies, your relatives, your friends, in exactly the same way as the Tories have done, which was exactly the same way as the Liberals did.
Can I just come back?
It's a way of life.
The lady who
Look, I
describes
think the
herself as a
important thing
loud
here is-
mouth hasn't had the chance yet. She hasn't been in power to get a chance to do all those things.
Okay.
But a year ago, this government was elected on a series of promises. That's what elections are all about. And as Sheila indicated, he did make the statement, sir, you have a choice. And Canadians were listening to that. And when they voted Conservative on September the 4th of 1984, they voted for change, and they voted for a different way of doing things, and they haven't received that kind of government that they expected when they voted. And you live with what you sow in politics, and that's why we in opposition are so, I suppose, outraged by the way in which the Mulroney government has failed to act in these manners. But I'll tell you one thing about that deficit. We said during the election campaign that we would never take out the burden of deficit reduction on the backs of poor and middle-income Canadians. And that was not what Mulroney said. And yet you have a government that in its first budget is going to widen the gap. The rich are going to get richer and the poor poorer. You've got Robin Hood in reverse. And I think that it's our job to point out to the Canadian public the lies that this man stands for.
That's right.
Fair enough, but to put it on a more sane basis, we Canadians who are, quote, free enterprisers must surely accept that patronage appointments by a government in power are a proper way of life. Is that not correct?
Not necessarily. It's been part of our political system for a number of years.
And will stay.
But the people of Canada spoke on September the 4th, 1984. They said they did not accept that system, and they wanted a change, and I think it's incumbent upon governments to change.
Go ahead from Kelowna.
Hello, Jack.
Yep.
I wish you would have a politician on from the East at least once a week, and we get a chance to talk to them, like when you had Chrétien on, and
Here are
not chat
three.
with Halifax, because we do feel alienated out here. You better believe it. And BC has been hurting for a long, long time, and we get really sick of looking at TV and seeing Parliament going on there, and all the pettiness and poor manners that we see. And as far as socialized housing, I think that maybe BC does need housing, but maybe we need back a capital cost allowance or something where everybody benefits, builders and investors and the people with cheaper rent.
But essentially, that's what the CMHC does now, and in order to do that, they have to have provincial government programs in place to allow what we so-called the 2% mortgages. If the provincial government does not take advantage of them...
Here, and what it just encourages more and more welfare. The people in BC are better off on welfare than going out working if there was jobs.
Some truth in that, and the people are not, this woman doesn't want to see the 2% mortgages. She wants it built by free enterprise, non-union
No, but
labor.
a 2% mortgage in terms of the private nonprofit or the private cooperative program does not necessarily have to be only nonprofit monies. There are private monies out there.
Go ahead, please.
Morning, Mr. Webster.
Morning.
I would like to ask the honourable members this question. Given the fact that Ontario has 95 seats in the House and Quebec 75, isn't the recent proposals by the Conservatives of free trade and relaxation of duties on imported men's shoes, to be followed later on by with women's shoes as well, basically political suicide for the Conservatives?
In the province of Ontario, I think that the shoe quota is going to hurt the Prime Minister very much, again, because of the credibility issue. The Prime Minister promised, he said that he would go to the EEC, he would go to GATT, he would go to the wall to ensure Canadian jobs in the shoe industry. And in fact, 8 out of 10 Canadians supported that position. Now he's turned his back on the workers, and believe me, he's going to live to pay the price for that.
I can think of 10 Conservative MPs for the province of Quebec who are going to have a difficult time going home this weekend, I can assure you.
The big issue with respect to free trade is our sovereignty, and I'm concerned about the negative impact on our political sovereignty, our cultural independence, and what the Prime Minister and his government have been doing is bringing us down the road of Americanization.
The Polar Sea was a good example. What have they done in the Polar Sea? They did nothing to the American invasion of our sovereign waters, and they've charged the pilot who dropped the Canadian flag as dropping a dangerous object.
Okay, that's about it for this morning. I was just trying to get a selection of insults to throw at you to remind people what you were called in the House of Commons. No one will ever dare call you titmouse or baby again.
Absolutely. I think that I made the point, and there were a couple of rude rodents that I could have thrown back, but I didn't. I chose to be a lady.
And you're a loudmouth punk who uses sleazebag tactics. Plead guilty.
That's not what my mother says.
But it's what somebody else says. And you, of course, are a very dignified chairman of the caucus.
That's right, that's my job.
That's your job. My thanks to John Nunziata, Sheila Copps, and Doug Frith. I'll be back after the break. Couple of things lined up for Monday. One is Irving Layton, Canada's best, and they tell me, most sexist poet. And Margaret Mitchell MP from Vancouver East, who's got problems she wants to explore with you about a Polish woman who had a baby born in Canada. And now both the baby and the woman are supposed to leave the country. Anyway, it's Webster, Monday, 9 a.m. precisely.
Very comfortable.
Was that, if I may dare say it, the full figure 18-hour playtext?
The 18 hours. Right. You can wear them 18 hours comfortably.
I remember City Times.
City Lights and Modern Times.
Modern Times, City Lights. Do turn down your television sound, sir.
No, I don't have it up.
Well, turn up your mind in that case.
You learn everything about the States. Don't you people learn anything about Canada? We don't live in igloos anymore. We're not in the far north, eh?
Poet, author, Irving Layton, Webster, Monday, 9 a.m. precisely. For a change of pace, I'll be reading poetry with Irving Layton, poet and author, on Webster on Monday at 9 a.m. precisely.